The Kaleidoscope.
Hey, it's your girl Sarah right here on the Kaleidoscope. A very good morning to you. I'm super excited to be here on, today, right here. I'm so excited to be here, and I'm so excited to be telling you about everything that is related to news right here in the United Kingdom and everything that you should be aware of and everything you should keep in mind, especially when you are trying to get back to normal, when you're trying to get back into everything and when you're trying to deal with how life is currently going, right? So I'm super excited to be here. You're with Sarah on the Kaleidoscope. Now I have a lot of fun things that I'll be talking about with you today, but right now um we'll be talking about so many different things, so make sure you stay tuned, right? But first of all, before I get into what we'll be talking about, if you really like some of the content that we have, if you really like some of the things we say and the topics we talk about, then you'll definitely, it'll make your life so much better if you follow us on our socials, which is Instagram, Facebook, TikTok, and Twitter, because you can keep yourself updated on the latest. You can keep yourself updated on what's happening, and you can make sure that you know what's happening, and you can always, whenever you get these notifications, you can always join live into this conversation, because we love to hear your thoughts, we love to hear your opinions, while we share our opinions as well. And obviously, because our purpose here is to have a really good conversation with everyone's opinion, with different perspectives and different views, because at the end of the day, that's going to contribute to such a better conversation, that's going to contribute to different thought processes and different ideas, and obviously we're very excited for that. So obviously you're hanging with me, Sarah, right here on the Kaleidoscope, and I will be talking about how the new EU rules would actually permit the use of most polymers without check. Now, why I felt like I needed to talk about this today was actually because there's a lot of plastic pollution happening all over Europe, especially right here in the United Kingdom, but also all over the world, right? Because plastic is widely used around the world, and it makes sense as to why people use plastic all around the world, and that's obviously because it's super easy to use, it's convenient, and it's cheap. So obviously that's why a lot of people around the world are using plastic, and because there is such a huge consumption in plastic, because so many people use plastic on a daily basis, it's actually beginning to affect our ecosystems, it's beginning to affect the environmental balance, right? And it isn't just beginning right now, it's been going on for a while. But obviously, because we haven't really paid attention, or because we haven't really done anything all these about all the things we saw, because of plastic pollution, because of all the effects that it has caused, because we didn't really do anything about it, we just let it happen, and we thought eventually, oh, it will get better, we don't really have to do anything. But because we haven't done anything, because we haven't made the change, obviously right now we are going through huge detrimental environmental effects. And it's not just the environment, we're also talking about humans, we're talking about our ecosystems, we're talking about fish, we're talking about marine life, right? So there's a lot of other environments, there's a lot of other societies, communities that are marginalized, that are actually being affected by plastic pollution. Now that's why I wanted to talk to you about it. And now today we're actually talking about these new EU rules that would actually permit the use of these polymers without check. Now, why that's very important, or what we need to focus on when it comes to this, is simply the fact that we live in this day and age where we use plastic a lot, right? And a lot of this plastic is made out of polymers. Now when the EU would actually have these new rules that would allow us to use polymers without checking them, that means it's going to be a lot of environmental hazards, it's going to be a lot of health hazards, right? So because things like this need a lot of consideration, need a lot of research, it's very, very important that we talk about this topic today, and we talk about what we can do and how we can actually try to make things better, not here but also in every European country out there, right? Because we need to understand that even though we're not a part of the EU, even though we are, trying to still come up with that deal to leave the EU, we need to understand that it doesn't matter if you're a part of the EU or not. Plastic pollution, all the environmental hazards, the health hazards that are there because of pollution doesn't just affect one country, it affects the entire world. And that's why we really need to be talking about it. right? So like I said, this week the EU will actually be discussing new rules on chemicals, and discussions are actually beginning today. So from today onwards, till the end of the week, they will be discussing new rules. They'll be discussing new regulations when it comes to polymers, and different things that are related to polymers, but obviously they will be discussing all of this, right? And like I said earlier, when it comes to plastic pollution, a lot of plastic pollution happens all over the world. And it's not just European countries, it's not just Asian countries, it's all over the world, right? And we've also seen a lot of research, we've seen a lot of data where we were shown the biggest polluters, we were shown how those polluters are actually now affecting the balance of the environment, the balance of life, and all the environmental and health hazards that are currently there. So obviously this is something that we really need to be talking about, because we've already seen the damages caused by pollution, right? We know what kind of damages it will create, and that's why it's very, very important for us to make sure that we address this issue right now. Because if we don't address this issue and we just let things be as it is right now, like back then when we didn't really do anything, when we knew there were so many effects of plastic pollution, what's actually going to happen is it's going to get even worse. And the problem with that is when you don't necessarily tackle a problem when you can tackle it, and when you just wait for it to get worse, chances are it's not really going to work out for any of us, right? And it's very important that we deal with issues as soon as they've sprung up, because or spring up rather, because the more we wait, the more we let time do its deed, because we think time will heal and all of that, the worse it gets. And when it gets really worse, sometimes you can't really change things, sometimes you just have to live with all the after effects of everything you've caused, right? So it's very important that our governments, it's very important that our people, and it's very important all these organizations who are in charge of regulating pollution, who like the EU, or even the United Nations, they actually need to take a really huge step and make these drastic changes, and start taking drastic steps when people don't, or rather when countries don't necessarily adhere to what they're supposed to do, all these treaties, documents that they've signed and they've ratified, which honestly makes it very important for them to actually make sure that the laws they have, or rather it makes it very important then to pass these laws, to make sure that they are making some form of change, because we need to make sure that we protect our planet, right? Now let's get into a little bit of statistics, right? Because over 300 million tons of plastic are actually produced every year for use in a wide variety of applications. And obviously, when it comes to polymers, it's not just plastics. There are different items that use polymers, and obviously plastic is one of the biggest polluters out there. It is causing huge environmental impacts, but also there are other things that we need to regulate as well, right? So when we're talking about polymers, we actually need to focus on all of that. So like I said, we were getting into some statistics. So 300 million tons of plastic are produced every year for use in a wide variety of applications, and at least 8 million tons of this plastic actually ends up in oceans every year. And they also tend to make up 80% of the marine debris that is there. And that means that it is a lot of destruction, because this debris is actually from surface waters to deep sea sediments, which means that even on the surface of water, and sometimes even at the bottom of the ocean. Now that's very important, because we need to all keep in mind the ecosystems, the fish, the different types of marine life that live in the ocean, right? And for a while, I actually forgot all the different types of marine organisms that lived. I was like, oh, what else? But that is what it was. But we really need to make sure we keep all of those things in mind, because we're talking about an entire species, right? When it comes to these fish who live there, when it comes to other marine life that lives there, it's very important that we take this step. It's very important that we actually do something about it, because we need to understand that a lot of this marine life that lives there is actually under the risk of extinction. Now don't forget the fact that we also eat a lot of fish, right? We consume a lot of fish, we consume a lot of seafood, and it's not just fish, it's different types of other fish, like cuttlefish or prawns or whatever it is. We consume, or tuna, we consume a lot of seafood. So especially when we're consuming a lot of seafood, we need to make sure that it's safe for us as well. Look, if you're someone who doesn't care about the environment, well, I'm pretty sure you care about yourself, right? So if you're one of those people, well, it's very important then that you eat something healthy, right? And for you to do that, you need to make sure that things you consume are also healthy, right? Because, for example, even if you're trying to be healthy, even if you're spending such an outrageous amount, or if you're spending so much on food, on trying to eat healthy, and you still consume this fish that has been in polluted environments because of how we've polluted, then it's not really helping you. It's not really helping pollution, it's not really helping any of the other things, it's not even helping you become healthy, right? So obviously you need to understand that when it comes to plastic pollution, when it comes to these use of polymers, it's not just us that's affected. It's also a lot of it's marine life, it's all the marine plants even that are affected by this. So it's very, very important that we actually take these steps. It's very important that we focus on taking these steps and trying to change all these detrimental effects that have been caused because of the use of polymers, right? Now I want to quickly just tell you about plastic and how plastic works rather, because plastic is basically this synthetic organic polymer that is made from petroleum, with properties that are ideally suited for a wide variety of applications. And this is what I said earlier as well. A lot of these applications are things like packaging, building, construction, household, and even sports equipment, right? And like I said, plastic is widely used because it's cheap, it's lightweight, and it's strong, and it's very malleable, right? It's very convenient to use, it's easy to work with, so obviously then people will keep using plastic, right? But what we need to understand is that half of the amount of plastics that are produced in a year are actually made for single use. So that means if we're producing 300 million tons of plastic for a year, 150 million tons of plastic is actually just single-use plastics, right? And I'm talking about plastic cutlery, plastic cups, plastic straws, even plastic chopsticks, things like that. A lot of them are single-use, and that's something that we really need to think about, because we consume a lot of single-use plastics, and that's going to have a lot of detrimental effects on the environment. But make sure you stay tuned, because we're going to head into a little break right now, and we will get back to talk about plastic, talk about how the new rules by the EU will actually affect a lot of plastic pollution, and how we really need to talk about this. But right now, let's get into a small break.
And it gives them something to look at, and it makes them laugh. It makes them laugh, so that's why I do it.
Oh, and it could be a really good pickup line as well. Ladies who ask, "Hey, excuse me, so why are you wearing something so colorful?" I mean, hey, you can always have something up on your sleeve. I mean, got me thinking. You want to stand out. Why do you want to stand out though so much, especially with these kind of shirts when you're riding? There must be a purpose behind it, right?
Well, when you say a purpose, Nick, what I do, I wear the shirts, mainly one, because they're nice and bright. So they make me visible, especially if I'm riding on the road.
Okay. That's very important, right? Because you want cars,
very important. And also, like, people see me in like calves, and perhaps I shouldn't be saying this on here, I suppose, but in the bar afterwards.
All right.
And it gives them something to look at, and it makes them laugh. It makes them laugh, so that's why I do it.
Oh, and it could be a really good pickup line as well. Ladies who ask, "Hey, excuse me, so why are you wearing something so colorful?" I mean, hey, you can always have something up on your sleeve. I mean, you look like a guy who would do.
You know me too well. You know me too well, Nick.
Climb Mount Everest. That is that's in my bucket list. You're laughing, but that is the facts right there. I'd love to do that. That is something I'm looking forward to do, hopefully.
Climb Everest.
Mount Everest. I mean, okay, not the very tip of Mount Everest, maybe the base camp at least.
You're talking about mental health. Well, if you went out and got some exercise in the fresh air, that would improve your mental health. It will make you feel better.
That's true. That is true. I wholeheartedly agree. But then for some people, it's how do you find the motivation to, especially when it comes to riding a bicycle, to do it again and again and again and again. It's a cycle that you have to be used to. How do you do it? What makes you wake up in the morning and decide, hey, I'm going to pick my bike up today. I'm going to cycle. What makes you want to do that?
What makes me want to do that?
Yeah. What do you like? What could you give listeners, like people listening in right now? What kind of tip could you give them?
Well, the first tip I would give them, if you haven't tried it before, try it. It can open up new horizons. It'll make you fitter. It will definitely make you fitter. Cycling is one of the best forms of aerobic exercise you can do.
It sounds like, I mean, if you think about it, yeah, it sounds like great fun. Because what essentially you're trying to say is also at the same time, when you, if you look at it from this perspective, with regards to mental health, especially when you look at it with mental health, this is another way to fight it. I feel like you go outside, you meet more people, you interact with, socially, you will interact with more people, and you're keeping fit, you're making connections, you're breathing in the good and exhaling the bad. I feel like that's a great thing right there.
Absolutely. Yeah, you got a better way with words than I have, I'll tell you. But you're quite right. What you say there.
I mean, I've been doing this for quite some time. I mean, hey, you'll get the hang of it.
I've been doing it for about 10 minutes now, so yeah.
That I can never really understand people staying in one room the whole day when you can have the world to see. I am a traveler. I travel. I love traveling. Traveling is just one of the things I do. And yeah, on top of my bucket list was, to one time, hopefully when I get there, go to Nepal and climb Mount Everest. That is that's in my bucket list. You're laughing, but that is the facts right there. I'd love to do that. That is something I'm looking forward to do, hopefully.
Climb Everest.
Mount Everest. I mean, okay, not the very tip of Mount Everest, maybe the base camp at least.
Base camp, yeah.
At least.
Would you be able to cycle there?
Oh.
The Kaleidoscope.
Hey, it's your girl Sarah right here on the Kaleidoscope. Now, if you're just tuning in, a very, very good morning to you. I'm super excited to be here, and I'm so excited to actually be talking to you about all these things that are that concern the United Kingdom, that actually has a lot of impacts, and that's something that we really need to talk about and pay attention to, especially because it might affect us. And obviously right now, like the topic we were talking about earlier, which is basically about plastic pollution, and how the new rules that will be implemented by the EU will actually reduce the checks on polymers is going to affect all of us, right? So obviously this is something that we will be talking about. Now, earlier we were talking about why plastic pollution is something we really need to pay attention to, why plastic pollution is something that we need to focus on right now, especially because if we keep waiting, if we keep thinking, oh, I can solve this in a few more years, if we keep thinking that, it's probably going to get really bad for us. It's going to get even worse than it is right now, and it's definitely not going to help any of us, and the things are just going to get even worse. So like I said earlier, it's so much better for you to actually try to address the problem as soon as it happens, rather than wait for it to develop and become even worse and then try to address the problem. Right now, that's what we were talking about. And if you're just tuning in, a very, very good morning. You're here on Relaks Radio with me, Sarah. And if you really like the content we talk about, if you like some of the things we do, then make sure to follow us on our socials, which is basically Instagram, TikTok, Facebook, and Twitter, so you can stay updated on what we're talking about, on what's happening, and even our live shows, because it's definitely going to help you. It's definitely going to make sure, it's going to make sure that you will be aware, and it's going to make sure that you are updated on what is currently happening around the world. Okay. And that's what we're talking about. So earlier I was just telling you how half of the plastics that are produced in here actually end up in the oceans, and what kind of impacts it has on ocean life and marine life, and even us, because we tend to consume seafood, and we also go to the ocean, but we there are different uses of the ocean, right? So obviously I was talking about how those things actually affect us as well. So another thing that I actually need to tell you is how is how plastics tend to decay, not decay rather, but plastics tend to break into small parts, right? And this is actually because of the solar UV radiation that is there, and even things like winds, currents, and other natural factors. Because of that, plastic, gets fragmented into small particles, and this is something called microplastics. And sometimes it's or rather it's called microplastics if it's particles that's smaller than 5 millimeters, and it's called nanoplastics if the particles are smaller than 100 nanometers. Now, what needs to be kept in mind when we're talking about microplastics, or when we're talking about nanoplastics, is that you cannot really see it with your naked eye, right? So obviously that means a lot of us won't really see if there are any microplastics in what we consume, or even in what we or even in some of the even in some of the products that we use, right? Because the products that we use could eventually end up being microplastics, and that's why it's very important for us to, if we're recycling the plastics we use, or if we're disposing the plastics we use, it's very important that we dispose of them in the correct way, because otherwise it's actually going to have huge environmental impacts. And right now microplastics are having a lot of environmental impacts. It's affecting us, it's affecting all marine life out there. So that is something that needs to be focused on as well. So like I said earlier, plastic pollution is a widespread problem, and it threatens a lot of things like ocean health, food safety and quality, and even human health, and also coastal tourism, and it contributes to climate change as well. So you understand that even though it started out as, people not disposing of plastic correctly, people just polluting polluting all the environments out there with plastic. It started out like that, but right now it has a lot of impacts. It affects a lot of different things, from ocean health to food safety to even climate change. So now it's quite obvious how this one thing has created a multitude of problems. So it's very, very important to actually, make the right decision. So I said I will be talking about the new rules that the EU will be thinking about or discussing, because they want to reduce the checks on polymers that are presently in use. So now, today, actually, the EU will be discussing new rates on chemicals, and according to scientists who actually sent this letter asking the EU to consider some of the claims and some of the concerns that they had, it will result in polymers being used without checks, right? And what this actually means is that only 6% of about 200,000 polymers will require extensive safety checks under the proposals that are currently being discussed as a part of the Europe's reach on chemical regulations. So obviously, this is something that we really need to be concerned about, right? Because right now there is a huge lack of data. There's a huge lack of transparency with regard to polymers that are in use, right? And because there is such little data, you can't necessarily assume that the absence of data is the absence of harm, because just because there isn't enough data, just because there isn't enough research done, that means that we still need to keep continuing that research. We need to keep continuing all these investments that we're making into researching on pollution, into researching on the effects of polymers and whatnot, right? So obviously that is something that we really, really need to focus on right now. But according to scientists, like I said earlier, all these scientists who wrote to the EU and told them to, consider their concerns, they're actually saying that this amount of checking that will be done, which is basically 6% of about 200,000 polymers, will actually be too little, and it would actually allow many common plastics to be used, despite various concerns that are there despite the various concerns that are there from these various scientists, right? So the European Environment Bureau is actually saying that exceptions to safety checks, which include things like polystyrenes, which have been linked to inflammation in rats, and polyacrylamides, which is used in the treatment of wastewater and adhesives and food packaging, could actually have huge detrimental effects, right? Obviously, like I said, polystyrene causes inflammation in rats, right? And look, rats are quite a nuisance, right? And I absolutely, it's like every time I see a rat, it's like a flight or fight mode. You're constantly, especially if it's someone like me. The moment I see rats or the moment I see cockroaches, I just like start screaming and running around the house because I'm so scared of them. But the thing is, obviously, even though we're scared of them, and even though some of us are actually scared of them, and even though it might be a nuisance, the thing is they're very, very important when it comes to the balance of ecosystems, when it comes to the balance of biodiversity. So obviously, if a lot of animals out there, if a lot of species of animals out there are getting affected by this, it also means that we are going to get affected as well. And it's not like we haven't gotten affected already. We have, and we're experiencing those effects. We're experiencing um how the lack of action we've taken to reduce plastic pollution, to reduce the consumption of plastic, and to reduce how much of wastage there is actually having huge detrimental effects right now, right? And what also needs to be understood is things like polystyrene or polyacrylamides is actually they're actually microplastics, right? Which means again there's going to be difficulty when it comes to trying to find these microplastics, when it comes to trying to regulate these microplastics, right? Because they tend to get stuck in waterways, they tend to get stuck inside of marine life, and the thing is, most of the time you can't see it until they die. So and the other thing is, sometimes some of these, some of the seafood that is, or rather some of the marine life that is there, we obviously consume them, right? So then these microplastics end up in our body as well. And what needs to be understood is sometimes there are even microplastics that can go away from the clothes you wear, right? Because some of the materials that are used in the production of clothes actually causes these little threads that are there in our clothes to actually break away, and that will actually result in microplastics being created and microplastics being spread further than it is already happening right now. So obviously, because of all these concerns that scientists are having, the committee actually said that they will take into consideration all the concerns that are voiced out by the scientists, right? And also we need to talk about how the proposals regarding polymers and the regulation of polymers are actually at an early stage right now. And obviously, further discussion will be taking place today and within the week. And that means that this committee will also, or this meeting rather, will also discuss some technical aspects on how to register polymers. But that doesn't mean that they have reached any final conclusion yet. That doesn't mean that they have come up with different ways of or rather they have finalized the way that they're going to register these polymers, the way that they're going to have these the way they're going to conduct these checks and whatnot. But obviously this means that they'll still be discussing it. So obviously, or hopefully rather, they will consider all the concerns that are voiced out by the scientists, and they will actually include them in the proposals or in the decisions that they're going to make. Now, Bethany Kani Amroth, who is also one of the scientists who wrote this letter and voiced her concerns with regard to these new checks that will be, or rather, the new rules that will be placed by the EU, actually said that the main goal of the EU should be to ensure a high level of protection for people and environmental health. Now, obviously, that is a huge role that needs to be that needs to be played by the EU. They obviously need to be concerned, or rather make sure that there is a high level of protection when it comes to people and environmental health. Because at the end of the day, we all need to protect all the people who are living here. We need to make sure that we address these issues, and we need to make sure that we actually try to have a more sustainable, a more greener environment, right? And she also said that she had a huge concern about the lack of data and transparency when it comes to the use of polymers. And what we need to understand is that when it comes to the use of plastic, it's very pervasive, right? That we use it a lot. We pollute our environments a lot with the use of plastic. And polymers actually, which is what the EU will be discussing today, actually goes way beyond just plastics and many other types of products as well. And there are different studies out there that indicate the negative impacts of polymers, because when it comes to human health, it has a lot of hormone disruption, and it's also very carcinogenic. You can end up getting different types of cancers. You can end up with different hormonal imbalances in your body, simply because of our consumption of plastic and how they eventually end up in our food chains. Now, another thing that needs to be understood is that the data with regard to the risks of specific polymers are basically non-existent, right? Or they're really scarce, and this is the huge concern that Kani Amroth actually was voicing out, was the lack of transparency and the lack of data that is currently available for people to make decisions. Now, for you to make decisions, for you to make informed decisions rather, you need a lot of data, you need a lot of research, you need enough data to make sure you're making the right decision. Now, simply because of the fact that there is a lot of or rather there is not a lot of, or rather the lack of data and the lack of transparency is actually making it very hard for even these scientists and all the people out there who are very concerned about the use of plastics to make these decisions, which means obviously then the EU will also have a hard time making these decisions simply because of the lack of evidence, right? And like I said earlier, the absence of data does not actually equal to the absence of harm, okay? Because we need to understand that polymer pollution is actually out of control and we're exposed to it daily, because they're used in plastic, they're used in textile, they're used in cleaning products and even cosmetics. So the problem is actually much larger than it looks, and we haven't even conducted proper research on it. If anything, we've just reached the tip of the iceberg, and that's why it's very, very important that we talk about these things, and they also consider these concerns that are there by scientists and other people who are very concerned about the environment. But right now, obviously, we'll head into a little break, but I'll be back afterwards to actually talk to you about plastic pollution, what the steps the EU has currently taken, and what this actually means for all of us. So make sure you stay tuned.
Again, but now, if you say to a child, if I went up to a child and said, "You've had one to forget," God, there'd be an inquest. Me, why did you reject my son? Oh, I haven't rejected your son.
I want to talk about, how the generation gap, how much it's changed, especially when you check the youth nowadays in comparison, to people back in the day.
I'd say when I was younger, it was more disciplined. Not now.
In comparison to now.
Not at all. Not now. The way things are nowadays, the younger generation, you seem that they can't accept the word no, if that makes sense. They can't
accept rejection, essentially, is all you're trying to say.
Yeah, they can't accept the word no. So if you, how did I do? Or you didn't do very well, and they get upset, And when I was a youngster, my father used to say to me, because I used to be sport mad when I was very young. Well, I still am sport mad, but like participating in different sports. And if I had a bad game, for example, I'd say to me, "You had one to forget." That's it.
Your dad sounds like a smart guy. I mean, yeah, that's the real fact of the matter, yeah.
He'd say to me, "You had one to forget. Get over it." And that was it. So I'd dust myself down and do it again. But now, if you say to a child, if I went up to a child and said, "You've had one to forget," God, there'd be an inquest. Me, why did you reject my son? Oh, I haven't rejected your son. Or daughter. I've just told them that they need to buck their ideas up.
That's the truth right there. I mean, if you think about it, if you check the generations, like right now in the US as well, I've seen a lot of these things as well. In the UK, you get medals for participation. But what's the point? What are you trying to? Yeah, what's the point? Either you win or you lose. People are so afraid to put that whole notion of losing. When it comes to right now, the generation gap is just crazy. How much a lot has changed. Social media has taken control of our lives, and we don't even realize it anymore. We're crippled because of it.
That's absolutely right, Nick. Because, as you said, nowadays it seems that you get rewarded for failure. For the life of me, Nick, I can't get my head around that. Perhaps I'm just getting old and morbid. I don't know. I just can't get my head around how you could be rewarded for failure.
The Kaleidoscope.
Hey, it's a girl Sarah right here on the Kaleidoscope. Now, if you're just tuning in, a very, very good morning to you. Super excited to be here. If you're just tuning in, we were talking about the new rules that will be discussed by the EU with regard to the checks, when it comes to the use of polymers and what that necessarily or what that means for all of us everywhere in the world, right? Because, like I said earlier, things like plastic pollution, things like environment pollution in general, is something that is that affects the whole world. It's not just one country, it's not just one community, it affects the whole world, and that is why we're talking about it today. And that is why that is something that is very, very important and needs to be discussed. Okay, now if you like some of the content we're talking about, if you like some of the things we do, well, the best way for you to stay updated is to follow us on our socials, which is basically TikTok, Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter. And if you follow us on our socials, if you follow us on our social media, you can actually make sure that you keep yourself updated, because you will get to know everything that we're talking about. You will get to know the latest updates, and you will even receive notifications when we're going live, when we have guests on our shows, and also a lot of other interesting things. Okay, so make sure you stay tuned for that, because it's definitely going to make your day better. It's definitely going to make your mood better as well, because there is a certain sense of comfort knowing that you know what is happening in the world, because it's always better to be informed than ignorant, if you know what I mean. So and right here on Relax Radio, we always keep you informed. That's the best way to keep yourselves informed. So make sure you stay informed by joining our conversation. You can be a part of our conversation. You can ask us questions. You can send us your messages, your thoughts, your opinions, or if there's anything else that you would like to share with us, you can do that. So just make sure you text us on 078-52473473, and we will respond to your questions, your messages, your thoughts, your opinions, whatever it is. If there is anything else you would like me to talk about in addition to plastic pollution, in addition to what we're talking right now, then you can text me and let me know on that exact same number. So make sure you do that, because we love to hear your opinion. We love to know what your thoughts are, because it's going to help us have a better conversation. It's going to help us have a more improved conversation as well. So make sure you do that. But let's get into what we were talking about earlier. We were talking about how the new rules that are going to be discussed, or the new rules that are going to be considered by the EU, will actually have a huge impact on the rest of the world, and why they need to make these informed decisions to make sure that our planet is safe and our planet is protected, right? So like I said earlier, polymer pollution is actually out of control. And like I said, it's because we're exposed to it daily. We constantly use plastics, and it's not just polymers aren't just found in plastics, right? Like I said, it's found in textiles, it's found in cleaning products, and it's found even in cosmetics. So a lot of the things that we use in a things we use on a day-to-day basis, everything we use daily is actually might be contributing to polymer pollution. It might be contributing to plastic pollution. So that's why it's very important for you to be aware. That's why it's very important for you to keep yourself informed about these things, and make sure that you're taking the necessary steps, and you're aware of the brands that you use, and make sure that they're sustainable as well. So like I said earlier, we used back then, when plastic pollution was, when it first started happening, when we first started noticing it, we used to think of plastic pollution as a bulky junk that was just there piling up in the environment. That's what we thought it was. But the thing is, because the technology we use, because of the things we use, and because of how advanced they are, because of how developed we are as people, we've actually made these problems worse for ourselves. Because now we know plastic pollution isn't just chunks, or rather chunks. It's not huge piles of plastic that is piling up near an ocean or near the beach, right? When we're talking about plastic pollution, it also means things like microplastics, and we now know that these things can actually break up into huge clouds of micro and nanoplastics, which can actually end up contaminating land, water, and air, and eventually end up in our bodies. Like I said, it eventually ends up in our bodies, and it will eventually be a part of the food chain, because like I said, we consume food, and or meat, or even fish. When we consume these things, a lot of the animals that we consume have already been in contact with plastic pollution, right? So obviously it eventually ends up in our bodies as well. So it's very, very important that we actually start understanding the effects of plastic pollution. Because look, if you go up to someone and tell them, hey, there's a lot of plastic pollution that's happening, they'll be like, sure, okay, while casually throwing away their plastic straw onto the road, or into, sometimes people don't even dispose of their garbage properly, right? There is a lot of littering that happens. So obviously they will tell you, oh, is that real? Does it have so many health impacts? Does it have so many detrimental effects? But still continue using plastics, right? So this threat is very real, and that's why that's why I'm telling you so much about it. Because obviously, as people, for our generation, it's actually our responsibility to sort of take things into our hands and make sure that we stop plastic pollution, or even try to reduce it. Because the generations before us haven't really been concerned about the environment, and in comparison to the previous generations, our generation is actually much more aware, much more conscious about the environment, and they're very, very interested, or they really want to take these steps to make sure that the environment is in a better place, right? And like I said, all these microplastics eventually end up in land, water, and air, and even sometimes inside our bodies. And we already know that a lot of these polymers that are there in plastic is actually quite toxic, right? So obviously, if we know that majority of them are toxic, then why is it that we're not still conducting these checks on the other polymers that are currently being used, right? Why are they taking this decision to decide that only certain polymers need checks? Why is that the case? Because if you're only going to really properly do some research, or conduct some research into 6% of the 200,000 polymers that are currently in use, well, then that means that there is something that there's something that you really need to there's something really wrong with that, because like I said earlier as well, there is a lack of transparency, there is a lack of data when it comes to all the polymers that are in use. And like I said, the lack of data doesn't necessarily mean that there is a lack of harm or there is an absence of harm. So that is why it's very important that they are allowed to check the safety of the rest of the polymers, and also to make sure that we don't or rather it doesn't end up in human bodies and create a lot of other disastrous effects, things we haven't even found out right now. Okay, but now we'll actually talk about what the European Union has actually done regarding plastic pollution, what kind of laws they've passed, and what kind of steps they've taken, right? So an important law they passed, or they approved, was actually on the 27th of March back in 2019, where they approved this law to ban single-use plastics by 2021. But like what I was or rather but what I was saying earlier was that even though they passed these laws, they haven't really been put into place, because there is still a huge proportion of countries out there who are still using single-use plastics. And if anything, the rate has actually doubled, instead of these countries actually cutting down their use of single-use plastics, right? And it's called the Single Use Plastics Directive, and it puts into place more responsibility for all these plastic producers out there. And also it makes sure that there are new ways of recycling, or rather there are new recycling targets for all the EU member states. So the law describes, or the law basically explains how European strategy for plastics, or rather how they can use this strategy for plastics as a step to actually establish a circular economy, where the design and production of plastics are production and design of plastics actually fully respect reuse, fully respect the needs when it comes to reuse, repairing, and recycling, right? And they're also making sure to promote sustainable materials, and they're making sure to develop them as well. So like I said earlier, this law actually stresses a lot on the significant negative environmental health and the economic impact of certain plastics. And another thing that is stated in this law is that about 80 to 85% of the marine litter in plastics is actually there's actually a lot of plastics when it comes to marine litter, and that's about 80 to 85%. But of this 80 to 85%, about 50% of it is actually single use plastics. So obviously it's quite obvious right now that the biggest issue when it comes to plastic is actually the use of the single use plastics that we use, and that's things like straws, cups, even cutlery that we use. So it's very important that we try to even if we're creating single use plastics, well, then we can do it in alternative ways, right? And what I mean by that is we can use environmentally friendly materials, to create some of the things that we're doing, or rather to create some of the products that we're creating. For example, like our need for straws, which was actually, it's not necessarily a need, but it was actually a want that was created simply because companies could earn a profit. Straws, we didn't really need straws. The need for straws was actually created. It was something that was, it was programmed into our minds, like, hey, if you're ever going to go out and get a cup of coffee, or you don't drink coffee with straws, but if you're ever going to go and get yourself a nice cup from you're going to get yourself some nice drink from Starbucks, whatever it is, whatever coffee shop or whatever restaurant it is, that this need for straws, our want for straws, was actually programmed into our minds. So obviously that is something we used to be able to exist without straws, and if that was the case, then we can pretty much exist without straws as well. It's not something that's necessary. It's not like you can't breathe if you don't have a straw. And if even if you're using straws, even if you're so, if you really need to use straws, well then get yourself a metal straw, get yourself a reusable straw that is not made out of plastic. Okay, so make sure to keep those things in mind as well when you're using plastic. But getting back into what the EU has actually done with regard to these plastics and whatnot. So under this new law, the EU will actually require all member states to achieve a 90% collection target for plastic bottles by 2029 and 77% by 2025. Okay, and it also needs these member states to or when it comes to their production of plastic bottles, it should contain at least 30% recycled content by 2030 and 25% recycled content by 2025, which is, in like 4 more years. And another thing that needs to be kept in mind is these laws are actually passed with the aims to bring about rapid shift in consumer behavior and to achieve environmental and economic benefits, and also to include, or rather to exclude, the emission, or to avoid the emission of 3.4 million tons of carbon dioxide equivalent. Okay, so that is why they're passing this law. That is why they're trying to change things up and switch things around, because they want to make sure that they want to make sure that the laws that are in place will actually handle and deal with polymer pollution, will deal with plastic pollution. But the thing is, this is still doesn't really make a lot of sense, because if their whole goal was to get rid of plastics by a certain time period, then these new rules that they're actually trying to introduce about reducing the number of checks on polymers is actually going to take away from all the progress they've made in terms of all the steps they've taken to get rid of plastics. So obviously that is something that doesn't really sit right with me. It sounds a bit controversial, to be honest, but let's get into that as well in a few more minutes, because we're going to head into a small break. But stay tuned, because I will be back again to talk about how this isn't necessarily going to, how it is quite controversial, and how it leaves a lot of uncertainty for all people and even member states within the EU.
Again, but now, if you say to a child, if I went up to a child and said, "You've had one to forget," God, there'd be an inquest. Me, why did you reject my son? Oh, I haven't rejected your son.
I want to talk about how the generation gap, has how much it's changed, especially when you check the youth nowadays in comparison, to people back in the day.
I'd say when I was younger, it was more disciplined. Not now.
In comparison to now.
Not at all. Not now. The way things are nowadays, the younger generation, you seem that they can't accept the word no. If that makes sense. They can't
accept rejection, essentially, is all you're trying to say.
Yeah, they can't accept the word no. So if you, how did I do? Well, you didn't do very well. And they get upset. And when I was a youngster, my father used to say to me, because I used to be sport mad when I was very young. Well, I still am sport mad, but like participating in different sports. And if I had a bad game, for example, he'd say to me, "You had one to forget." That's it.
Your dad sounds like a smart guy. I mean, yeah, that's the real fact of the matter, yeah.
He'd say to me, "You had one to forget. Get over it." And that was it. So I'd dust myself down and do it again. But now, if you say to a child, if I went up to a child and said, "You've had one to forget," God, there'd be an inquest. Me, why did you reject my son? Oh, I haven't rejected your son. Or daughter. I've just told them that they need to buck their ideas up.
That's the truth right there. I mean, if you think about it, if you check the generations, like right now in the US as well, I've seen a lot of these things as well. In the UK, you get medals for participation. But what's the point? What are you trying to? Yeah, what's the point? Either you win or you lose. People are so afraid to put that whole notion of losing. When it comes to right now, the generation gap is just crazy. How much a lot has changed. Social media has taken control of our lives, and we don't even realize it anymore. We're crippled because of it.
That's absolutely right, Nick. Because, as you said, nowadays it seems that you get rewarded for failure. For the life of me, Nick, I can't get my head around that. Perhaps I'm just getting old and morbid, I don't know. I just can't get my head around how you could be rewarded for failure.
The Kaleidoscope.
Hey, it's a girl Sarah right here on the Kaleidoscope. Now, if you're just tuning in, a very good morning. I'm Sarah right here on the Kaleidoscope, and you're on Relax Radio. We're talking about the new rules that the EU will try to put in place to actually reduce the amount of checks when it comes to polymers and the detrimental effects that has on the environment. Now, I was talking about I was talking about all the laws that they have put in place, or the recent laws that they have put in place to actually combat these issues, and to actually try to reduce the use of plastics, try to reduce the health hazards and environmental hazards that exist because of it. That's what I was talking about, and I was talking about the huge detrimental effects it has on the environment, and also the lack of transparency and the lack of data when it comes to plastic pollution and polymers as well. So that's what I was talking about, and that is, just a little insight to some of the content we talk about. We talk about finance, we talk about entertainment, business, gossip, whatever it is, lifestyle, traveling, whatever it is that is on your mind. We're talking about all of that. So make sure you stay tuned to Relax Radio. Make sure you follow us on our socials, which is Instagram, Facebook, TikTok, and Twitter, and you can actually keep yourself updated on everything that's happening in the world, from entertainment to health to science to finance, right? And that's going to, make life so much better for you, because you'll be an informed individual. So make sure you subscribe to our, or you follow our socials as well. And if you have any questions, you can text me on 07852 and I will answer your questions. I will and also, if you have any thoughts, opinions that you would like to share, or even messages that you'd like to share, make sure you do that on that same number, and I will love to share them with everyone who's listening in as well. Okay. So we'll get into how, if the laws that the or if what the EU is currently discussing does pass, the kind of effects it would have on the environment, and how it would necessarily be largely detrimental than beneficial. Okay, so like I said earlier, a lot of the things they're saying or doing doesn't necessarily sit right, and that is because they actually introduced a whole bunch of laws to combat plastic pollution, to combat microplastics, to make sure that there was a reduction in microplastics and plastic usage, including things like single-use plastics and whatnot. But now they're actually trying to reduce the amount of checks that are there on polymers, and the statistic, or rather the percentage they're trying to reduce it by, is actually where they'll only check 6% of the 200,000 polymers that are currently in use. And like I said, it doesn't necessarily sit right, because if you're trying to reduce plastic pollution, if you're trying to combat all these environmental problems, and you reduce the number of checks on polymers, then you're not really helping either side, right? You're in fact making things worse. Things are only going to get worse, because the less number of checks that take place means the higher it can be used for different productions, different, for different things, right? So obviously it's very important that we actually look into that as well. So like I said, some of the laws that they've put in place haven't really done anything. They're just put in place, but it hasn't necessarily reduced plastic pollution, or reduced the use of single use plastics by a significant amount, right? And that means we're already into 2021. It's 2021 already, and I understand that there was a pandemic, but having said that, we were also a lot at home as well. So if that's the case, if everyone was at home a lot, then how did plastic pollution double? How did all of these things skyrocket and get even worse, especially when we were staying at home? Now that's something that we need to look into. Take a moment, sit back, and and think about it as well. So that is something that isn't that doesn't really sit right with me as well. So like I said, the reduction of the checks in polymer will actually exacerbate some of the already existing issues that are there with regard to plastic pollution. And ultimately, at the end of the day, it is a responsibility of the European Union to protect people and the environmental health, because we coexist, and it's very important that we take care of our environment and make sure that everything is safe for everyone, right? So let's get into why it's actually very important for us to reduce plastic pollution, for us to increase the number of checks, and why it's important for us to have to enough data to actually make these decisions, right? So plastic pollution, like I said so many times before, is a really widespread problem that affects the whole environment, but mostly the marine environment, because it, like I said earlier, it threatens ocean health, it threatens food safety and quality, and even human health, tourism, and sometimes or even contributes to climate change. So let's talk about the impacts on the marine environment because of plastic pollution, because the most visible and disturbing impacts of marine plastics are actually ingestion, suffocation, and entanglement of hundreds of marine species, right? And I'm sure we've all seen pictures, because every time we're on social media, there's so many pictures, there's so many information about plastic pollution, there's so many, infographics, even those slides on Instagram that you can scroll and figure out, where you can learn actually about all the different types of plastic pollution that exist and how it's affecting all these, environments and different types of diversities around us as well. So obviously it's quite sad, because we've all seen a lot of pictures of these animals who are constantly entangled in these, or they've suffocated or ingested plastic, and it's actually affected them a lot, right? And when it comes to marine wildlife such as seabirds, whales, fishes, and turtles, they also mistake plastic waste for prey, and most die of starvation because their stomachs are filled with plastic debris. And it's really painful for them as well, because those plastics actually eventually result in a lot of lacerations, infections, and even the reduced ability to swim and internal injuries. Okay, imagine if you basically had like a knife stuck inside your body. You weren't stabbed from outside, but it was stuck inside your body. You would be struggling so much, right? Now that's obviously what these marine animals are going through as well. This is exactly what they are going through as well. And well, I'm talking about the impacts on food and health. There has been a lot of invisible plastics that have been identified in tap water, beer, salt, and are also present in all samples collected from around the world's oceans, right? And this includes the Arctic as well. So obviously we know the plastics are everywhere. The plastics are everywhere, all over the world. And several chemicals that are actually used in the production of plastics are actually known to be very carcinogenic and actually interfere with the human body's endocrine system, which eventually results in development, reproductive, neurological, and immune disorders in both humans and wildlife. So that is very important, because there is a lot of health effects, but we still keep using plastics like it's, like it has no effect, like it's the best thing in the world to do. So another thing is that a lot of these toxic contaminants also accumulate on the surface of plastic materials as a result of the prolonged exposure to seawater. And because of that, when these marine organisms ingest plastic debris, it actually enters the digestive systems, and over time it accumulates into our food web, because we tend to consume these animals. We tend to consume fish as well. So obviously, another thing or another issue that exists is that even though we know this happens, adequate research hasn't actually been done with regard to all the contamination when it comes to health and and marine life as well, because there isn't adequate research that hasn't or rather because there isn't adequate research that has been done. Obviously there's a lot of risks that we aren't aware of as well. Now, another thing, a huge thing that is very important right now is climate change, because the planet is going through a climate crisis, and plastic actually contributes to global warming, because plastic is a petroleum product, and when plastic is actually burnt or incinerated, it releases carbon dioxide into the atmosphere, which eventually increases carbon emissions. And carbon emissions mean global, or rather climate change happens and global warming increases. So that is something that needs to be kept in mind. And when it comes to tourism, we've seen a lot of beaches destroyed, polluted by plastics, and it actually damages the aesthetic value of tourist destinations as well. If you take countries like Sri Lanka or even other countries that actually depend on tourism, that have huge industries based on tourism, that is a lot of loss when it comes to tourism related income and huge economic costs because they have to clean and maintain these sites. So obviously there is a huge detrimental effect when it comes to plastic pollution, and that's why it's very important that we need to take steps ourselves. Don't always wait for the governments to take to take steps. Because sometimes it takes a while for them to pass these things. It takes a while for them to actually make sure these laws are in place and are actually effective. So until those things are effective, until those things work, something we can all do is actually to make sure that we ourselves take the necessary changes, that we ourselves make the necessary changes to make sure our planet is safe. So hopefully, when it comes to these new rules that the EU will be discussing, they will hopefully consider all these concerns that were claimed by scientists, all these concerns that they actually voiced and actually sent to the EU, and hopefully they will actually make a decision that will help all of Europe and also all of the world, because everyone is facing this problem. So stay tuned, because I'll be back in a few minutes to talk about I'll actually be back in a few minutes to talk about air pollution and how the or the medicals actually wrote a letter to Boris Johnson asking him to take immediate action to reduce the air pollution or the toxic air right here. So make sure you stay tuned for that, because I'll be back in a few minutes. But until then, stay tuned, because I have a lot of interesting content coming your way.